to do a 10-minute vent to myself alone on this subject, but I decided I'd go ahead and put it on a YouTube video. I have mixed feelings about the 4th of July. I'm going to tell you a little story. We'll go from there. When I was a kid, I remember being out in South Dakota, and we would go out to a lake in Sioux Falls or Watertown. It might have been Watertown. And we would watch the fireworks over the lake, and it would seem so close. I mean, the sparks would hit the grass next to you, but the grass was so wet it would go out right away. Little tiny sparks, most of them would fall in the lake. And it wasn't like tons of people like in California. It's like not quite as many, but yeah, just laying on a blanket near the lake, thinking about what kind of creatures are under the water. That's a lake that I would swim in too, and when I would go in there, I would never want to go in deep because I always felt like that lake had something weird at the bottom. Like something that would reach up and grab you. Not all lakes give you that feeling, but that particular lake had that feeling like something underneath that water. Anyways, you know, when you're a kid, it's laying in the grass, smelling the grass, you know, little sparks flying in the air, the scary creatures in the lake. But then, they're not scary unless you're swimming, but then it became, I moved to California, and I've never really liked the flavor of straight patriotism. Let me explain. There's like different, there are Republicans who are pretty zealous or fervent about maintaining their state of politics, but I don't confuse that with patriotism. That's two different things. So if you read Machiavelli, Machiavelli's like, there's basically two types of government that function on the earth in this present epoch in cities. And one of them is a principality, and the other one is a power. The power is also referred to as a republic. And in The Prince, Machiavelli explains that in a principality, the goal is to keep the prince on top, even though he's not the most talented, he's not the best for the job. You're trying to keep that guy on top. So you've got to suppress fresh blood. You have to suppress rivals. You have to keep all rivalries down, keep competitors looking not that hot, blah, blah. But if you are dealing with a power/republic, right, then a principality is like a monarchy. If you're dealing with a republic, then you're dealing with a system where there's always rivalry, and rivalry is what brings fresh blood to the surface and new talent and new ideas, new innovations, and all of that kind of stuff. So, like in a principality, a lot of energy, in a monarchy, a lot of energy is exerted to keep the competition at bay. A good example is in a monarchy, lords would be known for riding out and raping the virgins on their wedding day. You're keeping the competition at bay. Firstborn of every child it's going to be one of yours probably. And then because if you understand chimerism and epigenetics, you'll understand that the first pregnancy, whether the person miscarries or has it, if it's from a different father, it decides when you get pregnant by a subsequent father, what it does is the previous pregnancy leaves an echo epigenetically in the uterus that causes the choice of, because we only can code like 10% of the human genome. Like 90% of it's non-coding DNA that we don't technically understand. And so out of that entire DNA pool, which you got a lot of cards in there, and most of them don't get played on the front, right? Well, which cards get played and how they get played is decided by the previous pregnancy from the previous man. So even though the pregnancy is from a subsequent father, how the genetics are filed and filtered and which ones get expressed are decided by the previous pregnancy. So just think about it. In the principality running around and raping all the ladies, right off the bat, you are suppressing all of the competition because they're not going to be your competition. Now, also the other reason is because a woman has a default mode network in her brain when she gets pregnant where the frontal lobe starts to go through pruning of gray matter and basically makes them temporarily dumber while they're pregnant so that they'll take care of the child. So women like literally become like little walking infants when they're pregnant they become dumber in order to carry the child, and then their default mode network rewrites the personality or the narrative story about their life to explain away and accept this child. So if you had a child by rape, now you have to rewrite your entire narrative about who you are to incorporate why and justify why you would have a rape child and care for it. So there you go, principality. So principalities thrive off of keeping the rivals down. And one of the ways they do it is by keeping IQs down, because you can't actually, if you go research it, I heard Alex Jones say this and cite it on his thing, but you can't have a really good functioning monarchy unless the people's IQs are falling under 100. When the people's IQs start to fall under 100, they actually have better gross general output as a country under a monarchy. So like if you have people whose IQs are between 80 and 100, then to function efficiently, they require a monarchy. If you want a democracy or a republic, you're going to have people whose IQs are roughly between like 100 and like 120. If you ever want to move on to a different type of society altogether, you have to go 2 mean and deviations above the standard IQ score and probably go like above 136 for self-governance. On any kind of meaningful tribal self-governance, you probably need a higher IQ or to transcend into another type of government altogether. But so for a monarchy, it makes sense, like they've got to keep the fresh blood down. In a republic, the idea is that you're trying to, rivalries are encouraged because rivalries are always bringing fresh blood to the surface. Now, like from the perspective of the 4th of July, there's a lot of perspectives. So from one perspective, you could say, are we a principality or are we a republic? Because patriotism shouldn't be this blanket statement. Like, I love America regardless of whether it's in a monarchy or a republic. That doesn't make sense. America's not America if it's a monarchy. I wouldn't be patriotic if it was a monarchy, would you? It sort of defeats the whole purpose, doesn't it? So love is not blind or unconditional. Your patriotism, supposed, is based on the fact that you're dealing with a republic. Right? Now, you may not want a republic if your IQ is below 100. If your IQ and your functional EQ has dropped below 100, you may want a king. And you may not be able to prevent the wanting of a king because it's biologically driven in you that if your IQ is that low, you need a king. Because if you don't have one, you're not going to function in the big wide world of bad guys. So that's the first thing, mixed feelings about the 4th of July. Now we're going to get into it more. I used to read a lot of, I still read. I read like I Bury My Heart at Wounded Knee. I read a lot of these like Native American things that tell us what we did to the Native Americans. They don't say it anymore now. They just say Jamestown was a cannibal land. But back in the early, like in the 80s, the National Geographic put out an article that said that the first Thanksgiving that the Pilgrims ate the natives and cannibalized them. They don't say it now. If you can look it up on ChatGPT, it'll be like, oh no, that's not really true. But they used to say it. And they said it for a time. So then I've had times when I've had this like a little bit like I've had some times when I just didn't think about the 4th of July one way or the other. Really, I mean, not really. And then I've had times when I've thought about it from the perspective of like the Native Americans and how there was tribal people running around free and an ugly ass city took over. And I was angry at the 4th of July. But then I started thinking about it and I was like, it's really not the white settlers' fault. I mean, it's not like, it's really not. It's not. I started doing some additional research and I found out some things. The North America had a power structure that was so strong that white Europeans couldn't conquer it or invade it until around the time that they did. And it was just like the late 1400s, early 1500s. And the reason why is because there was several like governments that were going on in North America. One of them was in Chaco Canyon from approximately the American Southwest, and it spread. They had highways that stretched thousands of miles and went from the Four Corners area all the way out through the Mojave. They had lookouts. They had their signs of their trading going on in California. They went up into the Midwest. They went out into the sides. Then they had, they would have logs imported and slaves and workers, and they were more organized in a hierarchical system with slavery and abuse and cannibalism and abusing the natives. The natives were doing it to the natives worse than even, or at least as bad as the white people were doing it in the medieval areas, so there was no way that a conquest could have happened. Because like it says in Machiavelli's The Prince, what happens is that like for a country to be safe, so to speak, it has to be not so dangerous that its neighbors feel like it's always like gonna topple them and they have to take it down to survive, but dangerous enough to where if they attack it, they're not sure if they would survive. Right? So like a country needs to be as dangerous as its fellows, or it just gets conquered. So back in the Chaco Canyon era, and when there was the mound builders also built a pyramid type structure up in the northeast. The natives, the majority of North America was under a hierarchical control with slavery and stratification that was at least as intense as what was going on in medieval Europe. Certain areas, natives, there were certain tribes that were running around that were not as affected by the hierarchical system. But you could say that the same thing about medieval Europe. You could say that there's areas where there was tribal people running around doing their shit too. But the majority of them got caught up in it to some extent. So when I started researching it, I realized that the mound builders that were politically operational for a long time in the American Northeast, that they would do all kinds of like, they would gather together like 50, one of the cases they took 53 female virgins from nearby towns and slaughtered them all in brutal ways. Sometimes the men, they would show that they really slaughtered the men brutally. They would slaughter men and women. They would do human sacrifices non-stop and cannibalize people. And it's funny because you'll hear the natives talk about it like, oh, every person who brought a bucket of earth to this pyramid was just had a little prayer in their heart for goodness. And it's like, what do you think goodness is? Fucking, are you insane? These are evil people with an evil system, like the evil earth, like everybody else is evil. What motive would a government have for telling you that you're some special victimized people that everybody else is evil? This makes no sense. Even when you're looking for a country to live in, you're looking for a country, it's better to be hated than loved. Well, feared than loved, but not so much that you're hated. So when you're looking for a country, you're looking for a country that is feared by other countries, but not so much that it's hated by the other countries, because it gives you a certain amount of ability to pass through the country, do your thing, whatever your thing is. Because ultimately, you want to live your life and do your thing, right? No amount of patriotism is going to keep you in a country where you can't do your thing, whatever that thing is. So then basically the mound builders and the Chaco Canyon people had their slavery system, their system of attacking families, cannibalizing their families in their villages, having slaves build kivas and having them go down to the kiva and get slaughtered and human sacrificed in it. It shows that the Native Americans had multi-generational slaves that they would lash their feet and they would do horrible things to their feet that are still evidence when they found the bodies to torture them, that they had a way of clubbing women where they would give them a form of a lobotomy where they would heal from the lobotomy that still worked. And so they would club women into partial lobotomies to make them into permanent multi-generational slaves in Chaco Canyon. This went on for hundreds of years in the Mound Builder area. And we're taught a generalized version of Northwestern American history, that the natives were these innocent tribal people and bad white people came in and forced them into a hierarchy. And it is the biggest fucking lie. They are just as evil as the white people. Black people, white people, Asian people, all people are just as evil as other people. And if they try to tell you otherwise, they got some manipulative fucking agenda, and you shouldn't listen to them. All people are as evil as other people. Whoopi Goldberg tried to say it on The View about the Holocaust, that it's a human evil problem, and they almost kicked her off the show and made her have to write a long apology. It's because it's the truth. So, anyways, people get all offended, people are evil. So what happened with Chaco Canyon? Supposedly, according to the medicine men, after 300 years of the worst types of child virgin sacrifice, rape, lobotomizations, decapitations, cannibalism, and human sacrifice, suddenly the Great Spirit took notice and decided that it was going to rise up these holy people who are going to liberate the slaves in Chaco Canyon. Really? Or did you help dissolve the power structure that opened the door because the white people came in and conquered immediately afterwards? Because it just sounds like all you did is you were used to leave a power vacuum for another group of invaders to come in. And God tricked your ass, didn't he? Oh, you helped the holy people. Let's talk about that. This is what I think happened. So I think it's the Hopi people, if I'm not mistaken, they were given a different name. They had a specific name that they were given that I heard in this documentary with the medicine man. That the word Anasazi, the people who built the Puebloan buildings and had all the slaves, they were a matriarchal lineage of multi-generational slaveholders who sacrificed humans. The word Anasazi means enemy. So the local natives named them enemies. A lot of people say they came out from the south. A few people say that they migrated down from the north. It could be that some of them came up from the south and a few of them came down from the north and they joined up from this. But basically, the Hopi people were the slave class, and they were shorter and they weren't allowed. They were given a different name that meant essentially house slave. Okay. Now, everybody thinks that suddenly, after 300 years of the Hopi being treated hideously, that God suddenly got mad and raised up these holy people to drive out the bad people. That not only makes no sense, but it's a complete lie. Because if God was going to drive out the bad people, he would have done it when all those Hopi people were praying for 300 years while they were being tortured. But yet they were not delivered, not even once while they were being tortured. No, what happened was is the matrilineal lineage of cannibalistic child abusers who were running Chaco Canyon kept raping their slaves over and over and over again, multi-generationally. And after about 300 years, the slave population was objectively every bit as wicked and capable of acts of malice that were as bad or worse than the previous slaveholding population, so that the evil God couldn't make a decision about who was more wicked and so the deliverance wasn't to deliver these victimized people, it was that the victims had now become as bad or worse than their masters, so therefore there was another situation going on, and obviously a power vacuum needed to be created for the invasion that happened immediately afterwards. You know when a slave population goes free, typically? When they've been raped by narcissistic psychopathic sociopaths to where their children are as ridiculous and without ethics as their enemies. And at that point, you're equals because you're just as wicked. So nobody ever gets delivered from slavery as the victim who got out and was justified for never turning into a slave owner. If you don't believe me, look at the nation of Israel. Look at the nation of Israel. So they're in Egypt. Oh, the slavery, it's so bad. Never mind, all of the things that caused the slavery in the land were stuff that they brought on the land through their brother Joseph, and they took great delight in reaping the benefits from it. The only thing that happened was his policies that he put in place that were so good to create slaves got turned against them, and they ended up slapping some mud bricks together when they had a pharaoh who used Joseph's policies against his own people. And then they were like, wah, 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 get us out, right? Well, they didn't get delivered from slavery. Till what? Till they were as wicked and evil, if not more, than the people around them. Now, if the story was that they were delivered from slavery so that they could just be free from slavery, then they would have gone to the promised land and not had slaves, and there would have been prohibitions against slavery. But instead, we see that all the families in the Bible fight about who's going to get the blessing. What's the family blessing? Oh, who gets the slaves? What did they do when they got to the land of Israel? Oh, the first thing they set up was laws about who could steal other people's 3-year-old daughters and turn them into sex slaves. The whole fucking thing is fucked up. That is exactly what the Bible says. The Bible says, go take these little children and turn them into permanent multi-generational slaves as long as they're a female and they've never had sex with a man. So then the Israelites weren't brought out of Egypt because slavery was so wrong. It was to turn them into the ultimate slave owners. So then what's up with Chaco? What's up with Chaco Canyon? What's up with the 4th of July? You know, the sound of the fireworks, the sounds like there's bombs going off, I love it. I love the sound of the fireworks. The look of them, I don't like so much. The sound is good. If only the visuals would go with the sound, then we'd really have something shaking. But then the problem is that your country, then that would just, all that would mean is my country got weaker, so some more evil people would come in and subject us. So then it's like, I guess my country's got to stay evil so I don't have to personally face evil as much. But then you have to ask yourself another question. When war breaks out, is the real reason why it broke out because the things that were going on inside of people's houses were so worse? The way people were treating children inside their homes was so bad that open warfare amongst men is by far preferable. And you have to wonder about that too, because in Chaco Canyon, when they were supposedly having the biggest time of peace, is when they were doing the worst atrocities. So, on the human landscape, when you hear the word peace or people talk about peace, it means that the very worst atrocities so much worse than warfare, are going on, and that the word peace is an accursed lie. There's never peace. How do I feel about the 4th of July? I don't feel any way about it. You got a bunch of men come back from war and brag about how, oh, they went through so much and they fought for this country, and then you think to yourself, like, there's children born into households who fight from day one against their own family. And like, you're walking around and you're willing to have a metal pinned to your shoulder and have all society slap you on the back, while the children who've been fighting the real battle in their homes from the day they were born, they're called vagrants and ne'er-do-wells. You guys just suck.